The sound of a gunshot ripped through the air, sharp and deafening, as I turned in horror to see my daughter collapse to the ground. My heart pounded, my breath caught in my throat, and time seemed to freeze. She had been playing just moments ago, her innocent laughter filling the air. But now, there she was, motionless, blood pooling beneath her, staining the very ground where she once played without fear. I rushed toward her, my legs feeling like lead, the world around me fading into a blur. Was this real? Was this really happening? How could someone do this to a defenseless child? The shock hit me like a wave, but my focus was on one thing: getting to her before it was too late. I could hear the footsteps of teachers and students rushing in, but none of it mattered. Nothing mattered but her. As I knelt beside her, the horror of the moment hit me even harder. This wasn't just a random act of violence. No, this was personal. This was planned. And the worst part? It wasn't some stranger. It was Karen, the woman who had been terrorizing our lives for so long, the very one who had sworn to make our existence miserable. But this was something else entirely. She had crossed a line that no one should ever cross. The chaos around me seemed distant, almost as if I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But it was real, and I had to face the reality that the woman I had always known to be cruel had just tried to kill my daughter. And worse yet, she had left her to bleed on the playground, without a shred of remorse. What was her reason? Why would she do this? The questions raced through my mind as I fought to keep my daughter alive, but deep down, I knew this would not be an easy battle to win. And this story? It was far from over. My daughter, Lily, was always a fighter. Born with a disability, she'd faced more challenges in her short life than most people could imagine. But despite the hurdles, she had an infectious spirit. She loved school, her friends, and most of all, the playground. It was a place where she could forget about her struggles for a while and just be like the other kids. She wasn't just my daughter, she was my hero. Lily had an innocence that was both precious and vulnerable. Her disability made her more dependent on others than most, but that never stopped her from believing in the good of people. Every day, she met the world with a smile, always hopeful, always kind. That's the daughter I knew, the one who would never hurt anyone, the one who saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Then there was Karen. The HOA president, a woman with a reputation for being controlling, cruel, and vindictive. To the outside world, she was the epitome of power in the neighborhood, a figurehead who wielded her influence like a sword. But to those of us who had to live under her rule, Karen was nothing short of a nightmare. She had spent years making our lives miserable, imposing strict rules, enforcing ridiculous fines, and generally making it clear that she didn't care about anyone but herself. But the worst part? She wasn't just heartless, she was dangerous. And no one could have predicted how far she was willing to go. The setting was supposed to be safe, a school playground filled with children laughing, playing, and learning. But to me, it had become a battlefield. A place where a mother's worst nightmare would unfold, and my daughter, the most precious thing in my life, would become the target of a woman who had long held a personal vendetta against us. And what made it even harder to accept was that this wasn't just some random act. This was Karen's twisted idea of justice. In that moment, as I watched my daughter play, I had no idea that the woman I once thought was merely a nuisance was about to do something that would change our lives forever. The school playground was unusually quiet that day, as if the world was holding its breath. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the swings and slides. It should have been a typical afternoon, with children running and laughing, their carefree voices filling the air. But something about the silence felt off, unnatural, like a storm waiting to break. Lily was on the swing, her small frame moving gently back and forth. She grinned, her face lit up with joy, the kind of smile only a child can have, innocent and full of life. I watched her from across the yard, my heart swelling with a mix of love and worry. She had always loved this time of day, the 1 hour where she could be herself, away from the constant reminders of her disability. She wasn't the disabled girl on the playground right then, she was just Lily, swinging as high as she could, the wind in her hair. But that afternoon, as I stood there watching her, something inside me shifted. The usual noise of the other kids seemed distant, almost muted. I could hear my daughter's laughter, but the air felt charged, like it was about to snap. There was a knot in my stomach that I couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the tension that had been building in the neighborhood for months now, or maybe it was just a mother's intuition, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In the distance, I saw her, Karen. She stood at the far end of the playground, her arms crossed tightly, watching us with that cold, calculating expression she always wore. There was something different about her that day, though. The usual sense of control and superiority she exuded was gone. Instead, there was a quiet intensity in her eyes, something darker, more dangerous. It was as if she were waiting for the right moment to strike. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I caught her gaze. It was then that I remembered the tension between Karen and me, between the HOA and our family. For years, Karen had made our lives difficult, imposing unreasonable rules, threatening fines for the smallest things, always finding a way to make us feel unwelcome. It wasn't just the HOA that was a problem, it was Karen herself. Her vendetta against me and my family was personal. And I knew, deep down, that she would stop at nothing to make us suffer. The constant stress of dealing with her had taken its toll, but I had never imagined it would come to this. I knew she resented the fact that I had always fought back against her petty demands, always refused to be intimidated. But this? This was something far worse. This wasn't just a matter of her abusing her power, this was something far darker, something that would change everything. Lily, oblivious to the danger lurking nearby, continued to swing higher, her laughter ringing out like a melody in the stillness. I couldn't look away from Karen, though. My eyes were locked on her as she took a step forward, her pace slow but purposeful. She was moving closer, and I could feel my heart pounding harder in my chest. The tension between us was thick enough to slice through with a knife, and for the first time, I feared that the worst was about to happen. It was as if the whole world had narrowed down to this single moment. My daughter was vulnerable, so vulnerable, and I was helpless to protect her from the woman who had been tormenting us for far too long. And then, in an instant, the world shattered. A noise, a sharp, terrifying crack, cut through the air, followed by a deafening silence. I looked up in time to see my daughter drop to the ground, blood spreading across the playground like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I froze, my heart stopping as the reality of the situation set in. Karen had crossed the line. She had finally done it. Time seemed to stretch in the moments following the gunshot. It felt as though the world had been suspended in that instant, silent, frozen, before the chaos erupted. My heart pounded, the blood rushing in my ears as I turned to face the nightmare unfolding before me. I had just seen my daughter fall, the swing still swaying slightly from where she had been moments before. But she wasn't laughing anymore. Lily lay motionless on the ground, her body twisted at an unnatural angle, a pool of blood quickly spreading beneath her. My breath hitched, my chest tightening as if all the air had been sucked from the world. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. I remember my legs trembling as I stumbled forward, each step feeling like a lifetime. The playground around me, once filled with joy, had turned into a battlefield. Children stood frozen in place, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Teachers rushed to the scene, some yelling for help, others frantically trying to make sense of what had just happened. But all I could focus on was my daughter. My little girl. My feet finally reached her, and I fell to my knees beside her, my hands shaking as I touched her cold skin. The warmth of her blood soaked through my fingers, and I screamed, "Lily! Baby, stay with me." The sound of her name felt like a prayer, a desperate cry in the face of a horror I couldn't comprehend. But Lily didn't respond. Her eyes were open, but they were vacant, staring blankly at the sky, as though she had already drifted far away. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. How could this happen? How could Karen, how could anyone, do this to a defenseless child? I glanced up for a split second and saw her. Karen. She stood there, just beyond the perimeter of the playground, her figure oddly calm in contrast to the chaos around her. Her face was devoid of any emotion, no guilt, no remorse. She watched, cold and detached, as the scene unfolded before her eyes. My stomach turned, a cold shiver running down my spine. This wasn't just a random act of violence. No, this was something personal. She had planned this. She had made her decision to take it this far. I wanted to scream at her, to tear her apart for what she had done. But I had no time for that. My daughter needed me, and I couldn't waste another second. Somebody call 911. I yelled, my voice barely rising above the frantic voices of the teachers and the other children. I cradled Lily in my arms, feeling the ragged breath leave her body in shallow gasps. She was alive, but for how long? The question lingered, heavy in my chest. Her tiny body felt fragile in my arms, too fragile for the cruel reality she was now facing. My mind raced as I tried to remember the first aid training I had taken years ago. But the words didn't come. Nothing came. All I could think about was keeping her alive, keeping her with me. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder as the minutes ticked by. But it felt like hours. The school nurse arrived at my side, her face pale, and she immediately began applying pressure to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay calm," she whispered to me, her hands working swiftly but with an air of desperation. But I couldn't stay calm. Every second that passed, every drop of blood that seeped from my daughter's body, felt like another piece of my soul slipping away. "Lily, please, baby, stay with me," I begged, my voice breaking, raw with fear and love. "Please, don't leave me. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." But as I looked down at her, I saw the faintest flicker of something. Her hand twitched, a tiny movement that sent a jolt of hope rushing through me. "Lily?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Her eyes slowly, painfully, fluttered open. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but the terror didn't let up. She was still in grave danger. But she was here. She was still fighting. And as long as she was fighting, so would I. The sirens grew louder, the sound of paramedics rushing to our side. But I couldn't let go. I couldn't stop holding her, couldn't stop begging her to hold on just a little longer. In that moment, I felt more powerless than I had ever felt in my life. This wasn't just a fight for her life, it was a fight against a woman who had done something unforgivable. A woman who had tried to destroy my world, my family, and the one thing that mattered more than anything, my daughter. And as the paramedics took over, rushing her away, I realized something. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure Karen never, ever got away with what she had done. The anger inside me burned hotter than the fear. But there was no time for revenge right now. Right now, all I could think of was my daughter, and how I was going to make sure she got through this. The minutes that followed were a blur, a chaotic swirl of flashing lights, frantic voices, and the overwhelming scent of blood in the air. As they rushed Lily away in the ambulance, I sat there, numb. My mind raced, trying to process what had just happened, but it felt like the world had suddenly turned upside down. I could still hear the echo of the gunshot, feel the cold rush of terror that had flooded my veins as I watched my daughter fall. The drive to the hospital felt like it took an eternity. Every second was a nightmare, each one stretching longer than the last. All I could think about was Lily, her lifeless body in my arms, her shallow breaths, the blood that refused to stop. I knew that she was fighting, but I also knew that we were teetering on the edge of a cliff. At the hospital, doctors and nurses worked with urgent efficiency, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. They took her away almost immediately, and I was left standing in the cold, sterile hallway, feeling completely powerless. The world outside seemed to carry on as usual, but inside, my whole world had shattered. I sat there for what felt like hours, waiting for news, for someone to tell me that my daughter was going to be okay. But no one came. The silence was deafening, each minute dragging on, stretching out the agony. I couldn't make sense of what had happened. How could Karen, someone I had always known to be cruel and petty, take it this far? How could she target my disabled daughter, the one person who didn't deserve any of this? And then, just when I thought I might break under the weight of it all, a doctor finally emerged. His face was grim, his eyes filled with pity. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. The doctor didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for me to follow him. My heart sank as I followed him through the sterile, white hallways of the hospital, my footsteps echoing against the walls. "She's stable for now," he said finally, stopping in front of a door. "But she lost a lot of blood. There's still a risk of infection. We'll know more once she wakes up." I wanted to scream, to shout at him for giving me the worst news, but I held it in. Lily was alive, and that was all that mattered. For now. The aftermath wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The entire family was shaken. My husband was beside himself, blaming himself for not being there. My son, who had been at home, was terrified when he heard what had happened. The thought of Lily being alone, of her being hurt, tore him apart. And my family, my parents, my siblings, none of them knew what to say. We were all trapped in this strange, paralyzing grief, not knowing how to move forward, how to process the horror of the day. But the emotional scars weren't just felt within our family. The whole community was in shock. The school, the parents, even the people who had no connection to us, they were all horrified. No one could understand how such a thing could happen in a place that should have been safe. My daughter, the innocent child, had become the target of a hate that no one could comprehend. And the anger, the heartbreak, spread through our neighborhood like wildfire. I spent the next several days at the hospital, watching Lily's condition improve but knowing that the road ahead would be long. The physical wounds would heal with time, but the emotional damage, both for her and for me, was something that no one could predict. When Lily finally woke up, her eyes were dull, the confusion and fear evident in her face. She didn't remember much about what had happened, but she could see the tears in my eyes, could feel the tight grip I had on her hand. And in that moment, I promised her something I wasn't sure I could keep, that I would make sure Karen would never hurt her again. As the days passed, I began to understand the true depth of the trauma. Lily was terrified to go back to school. She couldn't even bear to be around the playground, the place where she had been hurt. The joy she once found in such simple things was now tainted with the memory of that day. And I could see it in her eyes. She was afraid of people, afraid of places she had once felt safe in. The worst part was knowing that Karen had caused all of this. A person who had made it her life's mission to make us suffer had now gone too far. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Karen didn't care. She didn't care about the damage she'd done, about the trauma she'd caused. To her, it was just another step in her quest to control and break the people around her. But I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The aftermath may have left scars on my family, but it also fueled something inside of me, a determination to make sure that Karen faced the consequences of her actions. My daughter might have been the victim, but I was ready to fight, not just for her safety, but for justice. And no matter what, I wasn't going to let this be the end of our story. As the days passed and Lily's condition stabilized, my mind couldn't escape one question: why? Why had Karen done this to my daughter? What could possibly drive a person to such a dark, twisted act? The answer wasn't clear, and the more I thought about it, the more unsettling the mystery became. At first, I convinced myself that it was some kind of accident, a wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe Karen had simply snapped, overwhelmed by the constant pressure of her position as the HOA president, always having to control everything and everyone in the neighborhood. But as I dug deeper, that theory started to feel less plausible, and something darker began to emerge. I remembered the countless times I'd clashed with Karen over the years, those petty disputes that began over trivial things. She had always been obsessed with control. From the tiniest detail, like the color of my front door, to the larger issues, like how we maintained our lawn, Karen's need to dictate every aspect of our lives had never been in question. But this was something far beyond the usual power trip. I started asking around, speaking to neighbors, looking for any clue, any hint of something that could explain her behavior. And that's when I learned something that made my stomach churn, a whisper of a rumor, something that Karen had kept hidden for years. Apparently, Karen wasn't just an obsessive, controlling woman. She had a dark past, one that no one in the neighborhood talked about openly, but it was there, buried under layers of secrecy. Years ago, before she became the HOA president, Karen had been involved in a scandalous situation that involved a previous tenant in the neighborhood. She had been caught in a highly manipulative scheme, something that had nearly ruined a family. The details were fuzzy, but one thing was clear: Karen had a pattern of seeking control at all costs, and when things didn't go her way, she resorted to extreme measures. It wasn't just about power, I realized. It was about revenge. Karen had been carrying around a deep resentment, not just toward me and my family, but toward everyone who had ever dared to challenge her. She wasn't trying to control us because she liked it, she did it because she was terrified of losing control. Her need for dominance wasn't about authority, it was about survival, a warped defense mechanism she developed over years of living with guilt, shame, and regret. But what pushed her over the edge? I soon found out that Karen had been following my family more closely than I had realized. It wasn't just about the petty HOA disputes, it went much deeper. I had been a thorn in her side for years, yes, but my daughter, Lily, was different. Lily represented everything Karen hated. She was innocent, pure, and happy in a way that Karen could never be. Lily had everything Karen had lost: hope, compassion, and the ability to trust others. Karen's anger toward my daughter wasn't just because of our past disagreements. It was because Lily was everything Karen could never be, everything Karen had once been and lost. I couldn't help but think that, in Karen's twisted mind, Lily's disability represented a weakness, a reminder of what Karen could never control, even though she tried. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that Karen wasn't just angry, she was obsessed. This wasn't an act of anger or frustration, it was an act of fear, a desperate attempt to regain control of a world she felt slipping away from her. She had tried to destroy everything in her path that threatened her sense of authority, and my daughter, Lily, was the final piece of the puzzle. But there was something even more unsettling about this revelation. The more I learned about Karen's past, the more it seemed clear that she wasn't just hiding her fear of losing control. She was hiding something darker, a fear that, if exposed, could shatter her entire existence. Lily had become the target, not because she was an easy victim, but because, in some twisted way, Karen believed she could finally make things right by eliminating the one thing that represented everything she could never have. As I pieced together these fragments of information, the truth became undeniable: Karen didn't just want to control us. She wanted to destroy us, to break our spirits, to make us just as broken as she was. And my daughter, Lily, had unknowingly become the symbol of everything Karen despised, and that made her the perfect target. The more I learned, the more the anger inside me grew. How could someone, anyone, be so heartless, so consumed by their own fears and insecurities that they would hurt a child? But as the pieces of Karen's past fell into place, I knew that the battle I was about to face would be far more complicated than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about holding her accountable for her actions, it was about uncovering the layers of manipulation and cruelty that had been building for years. The investigation into Karen's motives had only fueled my need for justice. Every step I took in uncovering her past only strengthened my resolve. I knew I had to confront her, but not in the way she expected. This wasn't just about getting back at her, it was about ensuring that she could never hurt my daughter, or anyone else, again. I decided that the confrontation needed to happen through legal means. If I acted on my own, I would risk losing everything I had worked so hard to protect. I needed evidence, I needed the truth, and most importantly, I needed to make sure that Karen would never be in a position to harm my family again. The first step was reaching out to a lawyer. I couldn't do this alone, and I wasn't about to let Karen slip through the cracks of the justice system. After gathering all the information I had about her past, her behavior toward us, and her actions that day, I realized that she had broken the law in more ways than one. She had attempted to take my daughter's life, and that was something that no one could ignore. It wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore, it was a criminal act, and it needed to be dealt with in the court of law. The lawyer advised me to file charges of attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. It wasn't an easy decision. I knew that confronting Karen in this way would change everything, not just for her, but for me and my family as well. But I had made my peace with it. Lily deserved justice. She deserved to feel safe again. And I was willing to fight for that, no matter the cost. The day I finally served Karen with the papers was a strange one. It was almost as if I could feel the weight of the entire situation bearing down on me. Karen had been warned that charges were coming, but when she received the papers, the look on her face was one of disbelief. She was shocked, yes, but there was also something else in her eyes. I could see it clearly: fear. For the first time, Karen was no longer in control. She had underestimated me, and now, it was too late. We had a meeting shortly after the papers were delivered. The confrontation was everything I had imagined it would be and so much worse. Karen tried to act as though she was untouchable, trying to deny everything, claiming that the incident was a mistake. But it was clear that she knew her life was about to unravel. The cold, heartless woman I had once feared was now trembling at the thought of facing the consequences of her actions. "You can't do this," she spat, her voice trembling with anger. "You have no idea what you're doing. This is going to ruin everything." Her words were empty, a last-ditch effort to regain control of the situation. But I wasn't listening anymore. I had heard enough from her. I had heard enough lies, enough manipulations. Now, it was time for the truth to come to light. The legal process was long, filled with courtroom battles, testimony, and emotional strain. But I was resolute. I could see the toll it was taking on Karen as the truth came out: her twisted, delusional motivations, her past, the lies she had hidden so carefully. The more we uncovered, the more people came forward, speaking about the things Karen had done to them, to their families, to the community. And as the layers peeled away, it became clear: Karen was not the woman she had pretended to be. She wasn't the queen of the neighborhood, she was just a coward hiding behind power, manipulating people to get what she wanted. In the end, Karen was convicted of attempted murder and several lesser charges. She was sentenced to a long time in prison, a place where she could no longer hurt anyone. But for me, the sentence wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. It wasn't about the punishment. It was about reclaiming our peace, our safety, and our lives. When the court ruled, I felt a strange sense of relief, but it wasn't the kind I expected. I had won, yes, but the fight had taken something from me, something that could never be returned. The scars on Lily's body and soul would remain, though they would fade with time. What mattered now was the future, and the future meant protecting her from the damage Karen had caused. After everything, I knew the journey wasn't over. My daughter was still healing, and so was I. But we had won something far more important than a legal victory. We had won back our peace. We had finally faced down the monster that had haunted our lives for so long. And while the scars of that day would never disappear, they would never define us either. Karen had tried to destroy us. But in the end, she failed. She was behind bars, and we were free. Free to move on, free to heal, and free to live the lives we deserved. No longer at the mercy of a woman who thought she could control us, we were finally free to find our way back to each other, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. What happened that day will stay with me forever. The memory of hearing that gunshot, the sight of my daughter lying on the ground, bleeding, is something I can never forget. It's a wound in my soul that time may heal, but never erase. Yet, through this unimaginable pain, something else became clear to me, something that I had never truly understood before. The strength of a mother's love is unmatched. It is unwavering, fierce, and unstoppable. When my daughter's life was on the line, I didn't just fight for her physical survival, I fought for her spirit, for the hope that she would never feel broken by what had happened. And in fighting for her, I realized something crucial: would do anything, sacrifice anything, to protect her. There is no force on this earth stronger than the love a parent has for their child. In the months that followed, as we began to heal, both physically and emotionally, I learned that the human spirit is resilient. Even in the face of the most unimaginable horrors, there is a strength within us that can rise from the darkest of places. My daughter, Lily, taught me that. Despite everything she had been through, despite the trauma that still haunted her, she found the courage to keep going. She found the courage to live, to love, and to trust again. But this story isn't just mine. It's a reminder that we all have the power to rise above the pain, to stand up against the injustices that come our way, and to fight for the ones we love. No matter how hard life gets, we are never as broken as we think we are. And when we stand together, when we find strength in each other, we can overcome anything. So, as I look to the future, I'm filled with hope. Hope for my daughter, for our family, and for everyone who faces their own battles. The darkness may come, but it will never last. The light will always find its way through. And as long as I have breath, I will fight with every ounce of my being for the people I love. Because when it comes to love, there is no greater force, and there is no end to what we are willing to do to protect it.